let me invite the other panelists up, and then you ask all the questions you want. I hope you have a bunch of them. Okay, so there's going to be Jeff, and could I invite the other speakers to come up? And then in addition to that, we're going to have Francisco Tacoa from ABB participate in the panel, and Walt Sikora from Industrial Defender. And before I let you ask questions, let me ask one more time. Please take the poll so I don't lose my job. I'm not a, I don't know which I'm classified as there, but whichever. More not about security, but security, personal security. Okay, yes.
Xavier from Skynet. I have a question actually for Jeffrey. You've invested a lot of infrastructure for security and to get things organized the way you thought, right? Have you done an analysis of your total cost of ownership? Yes, that's kind of the way we operate. We look at the total landed cost of the system versus the initial capital outlay. So when we, let's say, purchase or invest or look at a solution, we look at the cost of ownership long term. So that was part of the original. One of the games I played, one of the ways I leveraged this in was capital.
Oh, use the microphone, by the way. I guess, are they turned on?
I can certainly ratchet my voice up if necessary. I speak to large rooms without these.
All right.
Is this thing on? Can you hear me better? Is that better? So one of the ways that I brought started this, so the initial let's call them test beds or test systems that we put in place, I kind of piggybacked those in with the rest of the remote support as, you know, I didn't necessarily sell it as a security solution initially only. It was more of a remote support, security, and a few other things that got them in the door. And once the money holders realized the immediate benefit of what we were looking at, it became much easier to open the doors. And now it's not even a contemplation anymore. Every time we put in any kind of assembly system or in any kind of equipment, it's already a part of the standard bill of materials.
Have you figured out what your cost per user per year is? Or have you gone from the plant side? I'm curious just to get a baseline.
Cost per user per year. I don't really have one because the fixed cost to put it in was engineered into the system a few years ago from an architectural perspective. The only cost I have is the initial purchase of the equipment and then the half a day worth of a couple of engineers' time to make some VLAN changes and switch configuration changes and an electrician to mount and wire some of the equipment and some cables. I mean, that's literally my cost. After that, there is no cost. I let IT absorb the cost of the syslog server, and I don't pay for that. So I'm very good at not paying for stuff.
Over there.
After all the hardening you've done, Jeff, can you anecdotally describe the actual tangible benefit that you may have observed in either the behavior of the system, the performance of the system, because you might have or might have not been suffering from intrusion attempts or other kind of malfeasance in the past?
You know, I don't think we've really suffered from any outside, external malicious attacks. I don't think they've gotten down to the plant floor level. I know that from an enterprise level, our guys have fought off some nastiness. Now we have had malware and some different issues like that. So I will say that we have had that type of thing hit the floor. We've had the ever joyful USB key show up. And actually, one of the things I didn't have a slide up there for that is in my normal slide deck is we take a small firewall and any PC that is still on the controls field bus because it's tied to maybe sensory equipment or data acquisition equipment. I haven't moved it yet. It literally is a silent bridge in one port, out one port, and it learns all the traffic in a lab environment, and then it DPIs that connection. So we knowingly have stopped a number of things from getting onto that. We've isolated them to that PC. So we've essentially bottled the field bus between the two. So I know that for a fact. I know that we've caught a few, let's say, inappropriate configuration changes and other things with the syslogging and Orion, as well as our Asset Center server has allowed us to recover from poor decisions. right? By and large, the benefits we've seen from a recovery or detection perspective have been just poor decisions by folks in plants, or didn't, because they didn't know better, or they just made a bad choice.
Ashok?
Question for Jeff.
Oh, I was hoping we'd get one for
Could you
next.
address the account management and access control aspect of the plan you set up?
So everyone's in Active Directory, and I've got OUs for each user type. We've got engineering, electrical, and administration. And each person has to be in the appropriate OU, but they also have to have the appropriate certificates on their PCs. One thing I have not done yet, and I'm arguing with myself back and forth about it. One way I want to do it, one way the next day. So one day I decide I'm going to go ahead and put in, and I'm going to start using the actual AAM certificate authority and tie them to the OUs so that when they log in, they get the appropriate certificates from the certificate authority that we already have. The next day I say, no, I'm not. I'm going to put in my own certificate authority. I'm not going to use theirs because there's a chance for compromise if something gets to the enterprise level certificate authority. Then I say I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it as, right now my controls engineers, they when they go into a particular or given plant, they're issued a PC which has an image for that particular site, and it has the appropriate certificates on it already. I'm wishy-washying back and forth on how I want to do that. And some of it's based on, if I use enterprise-level security features like their certificate authority, then my security is somewhat dependent upon their ability to keep theirs from being compromised. Now, I will say that our security guy, Leo, is one of the best in the business. I've worked with a lot of them over the last 25 years, and I've met very few who have the breadth and the knowledge that he does. So where I'm at, I would probably be the most comfortable doing that because I think chances of someone compromising it are, with him in there. Obviously, there's always a chance, but he's very good at what he does. So, yeah, I'll just throw that out there, right?
Is there one for NERC? I just want to, everybody's asking Jeff, but I'm hoping to ask any questions for the DTE people, or? Yes.
I guess, George, you mentioned some security kind of on the process control features. About how much time do you spend on cybersecurity versus process control projects?
Myself, probably about 50% of my time is cybersecurity stuff or compliance. A lot of it is compliance effort for me. Probably a quarter of my time is compliance, a quarter is cybersecurity, and then the rest is typical process controls work.
Can everybody hear? Can everybody hear?
Nobody could hear? Nice.
I like your answer.
About a quarter of my time is done on compliance effort, a quarter cybersecurity, and then the rest, half is typical process controls work.
Just to follow up, do you ever see on your site, they actually have automation IT professionals in the automation? They were not tied to the IT. Do you see yourself eventually in having some of those dedicated people within your organization? Since you guys have all the money.
That's right.
They do.
In our group, we actually do have some people who are like that. We don't have a specific title for them. They're all engineers, process control engineers, but we have people in our group who fit that category. I would say myself being one of them. And then we have others who are strictly process controls.
Is this a question for the?
Yeah, it's sort of a follow-up with the DGA guys. Do you have anyone specifically within the controls group who came from the IT side? This is sort of that age-old debate. Do you grow someone from the control side into a security guy, or take a security guy teaching controls? Do you have anyone on the control side? It sounds like most of them are controls guys. They're learning security. Do you have security guys who learn control systems?
I started out in IT security, and I got my engineering degree and electrical engineering and went into controls. So
You
I'm
went
an
to the
example
dark
of
side.
Yeah. It's more fun. So.
Hey, wait a minute. I think it's the other way around.
I'd like to ask a question, I really want to let you all do it, but it's just been plaguing me. I follow things like standards and things like that, and there's a lot of talk about NERC CIP 5. And one of the what surprised me in the presentation was NERC CIP 5, right now most are mandated to be NERC CIP 3.
Yes.
NERC CIP 4, if I understand correctly, is like by April of this year, or some date, I forget, but now they're even talking
moved
about
it.
skipping it.
Yep.
And just going to NERC CIP 5. So I'm just wondering, after you've just done all this based on NERC CIP 4, and I understand NERC CIP 5 is quite different with respect to asset classifications
Yes.
and other things.
Uh-huh.
I'm just wondering, how's all that going to adapt with what you've done?
Well,
And ABB and Industrial Defender can comment too, because you guys have products that are supporting them, but go ahead, please.
we've taken the approach,
Does everybody follow my question? If you're not familiar with NERC CIP,
our ultimate goal is to be secure. And we've taken the approach that if we do everything we can to be secure, compliance comes easily.
compliance comes what?
More easily, much more easily. So if you just keep in that mindset where you almost forget about the standard and keep moving towards security, you will get to the point where you are compliant, and then the rest is paperwork.
Is it that much? Maybe again, I probably read these things wrong. I'm not in the utility business, but the NERC CIP, all the talk about NERC CIP is much more about reporting, compliance, having to go through and aligning with your, you have to do like when I mentioned when you did the asset baselining and stuff. I mean,
Right.
Now I understand, because somebody told me the other day, it was a cute thing, what everybody's trying to do now is to get everything they can outside of their facility. You know what I mean? There's certain things, it used to be the secure perimeter.
Right.
Now they've got a new name for that, I forget what it's called, but you're trying to
Electronic
say, this
security
is
perimeter.
outside, so I don't have to worry about it, or something like that. So it's a lot of that kind of gameplay. I say game playing, but strategy, maybe?
Yeah, if I can make a comment, I think, Jeff said it well. If security's done well, there's a return on investment, and you don't even anticipate that. And also, if you think about, the idea of focusing on security with the benefit or the return on investment that you can be compliant, that's the way to look at, when you embark upon trying to, not be that procrastinist or the person that does nothing, right? You got to do something to kind of steal from Jeff. And that's the key. So there's a lot of folks that, just right now are waiting for that sky to fall and waiting to look in the rearview mirror to have something happen in order to justify doing something. I think for the asset owners in the room, the biggest challenge for you all, and the question that should be asked is, how do you get started? How do you get management to recognize that you do need help, and the help that you need comes from resources, whether the resources are the people to do something about it, or the money to go find the people that can help you do something about it. But the bottom line is you need to do something about it. You just cannot ignore it. Whether or not you fall under NERC CIP and the compliance, the standard, if you folks look at the standards themselves, yes, there's a lot of documentation, yes, there's a lot of paperwork, but what NERC tries to convey and what people seem to misunderstand the standards trying to do is they're really trying to look and audit an entity to see whether or not they get or understand the importance of security. And really the compliance is just a measure and a way for them to come in and assess the understanding of an organization's capacity to just grasp the basic concept of security. And it really starts with top management and getting that support from your senior management to enable and facilitate and give you those resources to get started. Because without that, it doesn't matter what you've done or what you've attempted to show, without even having that management buy-in, you can fail security compliance. Because again, if the leadership doesn't stand behind you to support this initiative, it's going to die. And it's great to see organizations like Jeff's and DT's where they've got that support and that sponsorship to enable them to do the right thing. And again, sometimes you have to use the guise that we're not doing this as an insurance policy or trying to mitigate the fines around compliance. There's other benefits that why we're doing this. those untangible things that you have to look for, and that's where you have to be creative in thinking about how, if I did this, I can improve my operation, I can improve my uptime, my availability, I can reduce the effort or the time that my engineers spend escorting people around. There are creative ways of doing that if you just stop and think about it.
Yeah, and there is definitely more than one driver in this market. So compliance is clearly one of those drivers. Some other customers also look at this issue from a different perspective, and the perspective that they look at is it's a matter of business continuity. It's a matter that my plant cannot go down for any amount of time because the economic loss that we're going to suffer cannot be allowed. And so now we're looking at the driver, which is really more related to process and business excellence, operational excellence, which is a very valid driver for many customers. And in doing the things that they need to do to improve their profile and their ability to sustain attacks and avoid downtime, they are effectively, in a way, compliant with some of the regulations. Just being compliant does not guarantee that you're secure. However, being secure will help you be compliant. So there are different drivers. One of those is compliance. The other one is business continuity, especially within the power generation industry where downtime is simply not what you want. And there are other drivers as well that we are seeing in North America.
Just a follow-up. I'm sorry, I have to watch myself. But it's just because your presentation, a very big part of your presentation at the beginning, talked about NERC-CIP compliance being a driver for this, number one. Number two, you even had the thing about 4 hours of baselining and reporting. And
Right.
so a lot of the discussion, it may have been you were just presenting it from that perspective, I don't know, was justified. And maybe so the reason I'm asking is, if you remember yesterday in the session I had in my survey, the regulations were low, and I made the comment maybe we need more of them, because I think in your case, for whatever reason, even though I know you started by saying DTE is very security conscious, still, that apparently helped you get funding to do something that you had to do.
Yes, yeah. I would think without the NERC-CIP regulations, we may not have gotten the amount of funding that we did get to the point where we are today. They were definitely a driver for us.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes?
At DT, yes. Actually, a lot of that is that security policy is set at the corporate level. It's something we do from the desktops in at somebody's workstation all the way down to where it's feasible, our control systems. Yeah. Right. Yeah, of course, and I think that's where the security and layers model comes in. You set up you do the best you can to try and mitigate those where it's feasible, and put as many layers as you can to protect against that. But sometimes you just can't get there. I'm having some trouble. I'm having a little trouble here.
Can you stand up,
if
Abraham?
I can try to address that, because we work with a lot of the automation vendors, and by doing that, we also get visibility into some of the initiatives that they've taken. And for the folks that are asset owners, truly we understand that, if you take the ISA model in terms of, the layers, right? Layer 0 being where the valves, the actuators, the instrumentation is, then the next layer up, 1 where the controllers. That communication is pretty critical in terms of, when you try to apply the IT types of technology of encryption, that's where the highest risk of impact to the reliability, the availability of the system. So for the vendors that are in the room, you can speak to that. The good news is the vendors are maturing and starting to realize that, open, unsecure communication down at that layer is something that needs to be addressed. And as their product evolution, their secure development lifecycle evolves, they're moving towards that direction, even to the point of having certificates and managing certificates for all that communication. And that's the good news. The bad news is that for the asset owners that already have the legacy products deployed, you don't have that luxury unless you rip and replace and try to put in new technology. And that's the challenge. That's the balance that you all have to face. Up at the layer 2, 2.5, where you've got the HMI and the SCADA, all the PCs that Jeff tries to take off that Ethernet bus, that's much easier, right? Because that refresh cycle is 3 to 5 years. And so you can be afforded the opportunity to put in a more secure, more robust layer in that. But down at the controller, down at the I/O, that's going to be a while before that gets to that level of encryption and security in terms of hardening. But I think the other question I would ask is, maybe for the vendors that are in the room, is how do you deal with Jeff when he says, I want that PC off the industrial Ethernet?
That was going to be my question.
And then he says, I want him off. And so now, to me, that's the big challenge in terms of, the vendors themselves responding to customers that say, it's not acceptable to have this, or it's not acceptable to not allow me to do this hardening, and get the pushback that there's technology and things that they can do, being the customers, that the vendors themselves won't allow because they're just not comfortable with or don't know how to support that request, right? So that's a question back to the audience. If any vendors in the room want to respond to that, I'd be more than happy. And maybe we'll let this vendor respond.
Sure. Well, and what I wanted to say about that is, yeah, absolutely. As DT mentioned, the aspects, the software aspects that I call, really matter and are very important. But in order to really ensure more security for your infrastructure, you really need to look at the physical aspects of it. I mean, we all know that there have been power plants compromised because of a physical event that happened on site while you had third-party contractors doing some work. And so it's important to do the things that you mentioned, but we cannot ignore the physical aspects of security that will potentially compromise your operation. And the example that we have all heard is the use of USB drives that in some cases have been infected with malicious software, and inadvertently this has gotten into a control systems that has compromised a facility.
Could is there a question out there? Go ahead.
Wanted to make a comment. So a few things you really have to start with, as some of the panelists indicated, is start with the design, follow the ISO 99. That kind of gets you in a more precise way. Then you start looking at you have to do the HMI hardening, you have to do the whitelist, you have to do how do you start locking down what goes on to that HMI and applications and the ports and services and all the things that come along with it, removing all the unnecessary things so it's not a best buy PC, but it is really a hardened industrial HMI. And then you can kind of get to the point where you can manage it over here.
I'm sorry. No, Jeff, the point you made, and I thought you just brought it up here, but I mean, that sounded like brilliant. How do I solve my problem with my PCs? I get rid of them. I move it above. But I'm just curious to understand exactly what kind of PCs you're talking about. My experience has been people still have HMIs, they have historians that they just don't put up on the enterprise. Now, maybe that's what you're doing and I just don't understand it. And maybe that is exactly what you're doing, which is an interesting way, because you pretty much said, I don't know what classification this would be for you, but you pretty much said the problem is your problem. A big part of the problem that people talk about. I mean, with HMIs, with all the types of PC devices where the viruses are, the whitelisting issues are, the patch management issues are. You completely change the patch management challenge, I think, by moving it to the enterprise, as you said, becomes an IT method. So I'm just wondering, what all are you moving? Literally, could you elaborate?
We have what you're calling like a historian. We have every assembly system has two industrial grade 5 server grade PCs that hold SQL Server Enterprise. One's a hot mirror, the other one. Those exist now. I could show you the old and new. They now exist access. They're physically in the same panel they were, down on the line. They were dual NIC. One went to the enterprise, and one went to the field bus. Field bus is now removed, and it makes a SSL VPN connection with certificate-based credentials back to Zenwall. And so that little box does about 10,000 packets per second of DPI at 2 milliseconds of latency. So it's extremely fast. And then we have multiple gauge PCs. We have multiple teardown PCs. So I say at any given time we've got somewhere between 8 and 16 PCs on an average size small assembly system running through that as an unattended application.
Now this is running through the DPI firewall, the
Yep,
Zen wall.
Running through the firewall. They're all still right there. I mean, it's literally in the station. It's the HMI with the gauge PC. It's in the station, mounted the station, powered by the station. Used to be dual NIC down to the local station switch up to the AM network. There's no longer a connection to the local station switch. So it depends now on the AM network's uptime, which told by IT is extremely good. And it runs back to the firewall, and its only access to that field bus is through that appliance.
But how do you protect, I'm sorry, oops. Hopefully I'm asking questions that you would ask. How do you, I mean, that sounds good, but how do you protect that, say there's an HMI up there, something that is needed to operate that line. But now what you've done is moved it out of the field bus realm and put it up above, which I understand that. But you still have to worry about whether that gets infected, whether it goes down. I mean, if it goes down, how do you operate your line? It could disrupt.
I do, but if you think about it from the perspective of the IT guys don't often have suppliers coming in putting USB keys in their equipment. I have suppliers coming in bunking around my equipment all the time. So the level of interface from outside people is significantly greater than controls equipment. So now they're not controls equipment so much. So if you take, for example, if I have 16 of them on a line, let's say I still have to have 2 of them for whatever reason because of the nature of the application, it won't be for long. If he infects one, now he infected all 16. Now if he infects one, he only infects 2.
Right.
So I've drastically reduced my risk there. We've got a gauge machine. We've got a particular type of machine called an NDH. It's a singular machine that's about $1.5 million. It's a multi-axis system, servo-based, highly critical, runs very expensive analytical software, does harmonics, noise, vibration, harshness. We've had those taken down for days because of malware from a supplier walks in with a USB key. I don't have that problem anymore. It's fine. It does exist. And the interface is fast enough that, I mean, I can log into the Zenwall, and it sits at 7% utilization, 13% memory, and I've got 7 PCs, 4 asset center, agents tied to it, 3 engineers logged into myself, and with the board sensitive. Just chucking. So part of the battle is horsepower. There's a lot of security appliances out there that don't have the horsepower to do that. That's part of what you have to figure out when you're looking for what your solution is. You better make sure it's got the horsepower to get the job done.
Right. And I think that's a good point to folks that attempt to take enterprise IT-like technology and have not gone through the validation and the vetting and the testing and attempt to, just sort of apply the, DMZ IT-like principles at that layer without understanding the implications. So, having, latency and deep packet inspection perform at that, at that level is critical. And again, this is where, as asset owners, you folks have been pushing back on the vendors to, do that for you, or at least provide those solutions, and that's, again, critical at that layer. Same applies to, the intrusive technology, the intrusive nature of whitelisting. Everyone believes that whitelisting is the, the next newest silver bullet. I put whitelisting on my computers, and I don't have to worry about, updating it and patching it, and it's going to protect me from everything. But what they fail to realize is, to do whitelisting correctly requires a lot of validation, a lot of testing to get those things to properly work. Because the last thing you want is, if you're failing over an aspect server or any type of redundant server in your DCS, and you haven't tested what's going to happen when that failover mechanism works with whitelisting applied, you'll be in for a surprise when things don't fail over or switch over when you most need them. So again, make sure you're working with your vendors and/or suppliers that understand those types of implications on the reliability and the availability of your automation system.
please.
Very subtle aspects to some of these issues. It's something as basic as a network switch rebooting. Some people believe the network switch just comes back to life instantaneously.
They don't.
Some of these devices can take 5 to 10 minutes to come back to life. If you're in the middle of a transition and you've had a failure of a component and you're waiting for that component to come back online, you may actually have total loss of use for some period of time because you've had a failure and the other component's still moving itself up. So one of the aspects of understanding the way these systems work isn't just being secure, but it's also understanding the behavior of the device so you understand what happens in the event of other issues happening simultaneously with trying to block or trying to pass information. And if the device is unavailable because it's in the middle of a transition, you really have a problem. And so part of the problem with all of these components is that as you add different vendor solutions for different bits and pieces, who has the ability or takes the time to try to go through the different use cases or the unused cases, maybe a better way to do it, and understand the behavior that the total system solution is going to give you as you know. Most of us have barely got enough time to put down all things together and hope that it works, much less to go through different use case testing to ensure that it works under different regimes. How do you guys address situations like that in real life?
Well, I can give you my perspective on that. So there are a couple of ways in which this could be addressed. So one of those is the need for redundancy. It's important to have redundancy, especially with critical systems, to ensure that when you have situations where a piece of equipment goes down, you will not lose the functionality for any amount of time. But perhaps more importantly is during the commissioning of the system, it's important to write the test system to include these kind of situations. And this is probably going to be customized to one specific customer or even one specific situation that the customer faces. So having a robust way to burn in the system and to make sure that you are testing these under real customer situations as opposed to just testing it in the lab and then hoping that that's going to work for the customer. So there are ways to do this. One way is by doing proper commissioning to capture these kind of events and potentially delineate some of the situations where you may face a potential issue with equipment going down. The other one would be the redundancy that can help you once the equipment and the system has been accepted and it's up and running.
Jeff?
So I don't build rockets. Some folks do. Some folks have a power grid to worry about. Fortunately, I don't. So that's part of what you consider when you look at the level of testing or the level. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. However, from our perspective, and any of my suppliers in the room, and I'm looking at a few of them and they're smiling knowingly, by the time I'm done with their equipment, I'm generally letting them know a few things about it they didn't know. Because that's the level of testing we do before we deploy it. For example, I've got about a 37-page questionnaire for anything anybody wants to put on our Ethernet IP field bus. Before I will consider it, they have to answer the questions. And the questions will decide whether or not we even look at it or do any testing to it. So we spent, I would say, 6 to 9 months in a lab environment beating the tar out of the system, testing all the potential failure modes that met the criteria that we felt we needed to fail. Is this system capable of hot failover and hot standby? Absolutely. Is where we need it so critical that if it stopped and things stopped, that on the outside chance that happened, that we couldn't lose 30 minutes of downtime to swap it out? Nope. Because the system we picked, I pull the compact flash card out of the bottom, pop it into the new one, power it up, walk away. So it's the amount of time it takes a guy to go to stores and pop it in. So is that worth the cost of me buying 2 of them, putting in this redundancy and worrying about that? Nope. It's really not. So it's again, it's assessment and understanding what your unique situation is. For these fellas, can they afford to do that? Nope, because 30 minutes without power, I start calling the phone company or the power company. I want to know why my sump pump's not working and why my basement's starting to flood. Right? That's a whole different set of problems they have than I do. And to answer your question is, it's also a mindset change. You know, we actually have a team of guys, or a couple of guys now, who are purely dedicated to doing that type of stuff, because I choose not to get that phone call at 2:30 in the morning from Thailand when something doesn't work, right? So we choose to test it all well ahead of time and understand how everything works as a system before we deploy anything anywhere. And it's a mindset that you have to get your company to make that paradigm shift, or you're going to continue to fight the good fight for a long time, and it's a painful fight, right?
Yeah, and again, as a vendor, you know, I can attest to the pain it takes to get to, you know, our system validated, tested, and get through all of the operational testing through every product line, every business unit, for every version of every release, you know, with all of our partners. And we have a lot of partners that we do that with, and many of them are here. You know, the challenge for us as a company is for those OEMs and those customers that have systems that we don't have a partnership with, because they see the value of what our solution brings in terms of, you know, all the nice things that Jeff described that his, you know, Rockwell Asset Management does is what our solution does, but it does it for not just the Rockwell system. It does the same thing across Yokogawa, Emerson Ovation, ABB, all of the network management, 800XA on the Symphony Plus. We do this for GE. We do it for every automation platform that's out there. So for us, the challenge is how do we validate, how do we verify, and how do we ensure that we don't create, you know, any denial of service or any impact to the operation of that system. And that's what we've been able to achieve. Our focus for the past 10 years is doing nothing but focusing on those automation security technologies, just as Jeff described, as DTE is enabled, you know, because they don't just have, you know, systems from one vendor. They have systems from many different vendors, and the challenge is you want to get a single solution that does that type of capability so you can get those return on investments across that whole heterogeneous asset fleet that you might have.
Abraham? I wish we had a microphone back there.
So, let's see. No.
All right, any other questions? I'm sorry.
Asset management to a degree, because I own that, right? So our asset management system's tied into it, and the control systems all are. I mean, my responsibilities are, if it has anything to do with the controls globally, I own it. So some of the other systems you mentioned are not mine, and they fall to our IT team, our plant floor IT team to manage. Will I be due to some changes internally? My role may be expanding significantly here in the near future, and when that happens, they will see things my way. So maybe.
Any other questions? Yes.
In terms of network segregation, we see suppliers that is recommending supervisors to cut more vertically than other companies, meaning putting on the same line for production unit, the IO, PLC, HMI, there is like all on the same line. To have several VLAN, one VLAN for each unit. In terms of security, how many we are seeing?
VLAN hopping.
Well, I guess for us, we went through is we actually put independent switches and IP schemes per each unit, and then we segregated the individual functions of the networks, control, field bus or bus networks, OPC, third party, And we actually segregated those out into individual switches and IP ranges as opposed to VLANs. And we took the VLANs, really just jumped them together to port them off to a firewall, to get them to data historians, to get them to satellite clocks, for more of a management level thing, whereas they were physically segregated by IP range and by physical switches.
We also put firewalls in between our control networks and our HMI networks, field bus network, corporate network.
Yeah, I think for your question, is just having VLANs enough from a security perspective?
No, no, the new recommendation that was made to us, that instead of having the segregation done by the level of automation, category control layer,
Sure.
VLAN, and then control VLAN and I/O, dedicated network, to mix them, that to isolate them per units.
What kind of industry are you in?
So, in food industry, that has nothing to do with this, huh? This was a recommendation from the
No, I understand that. I was just, but for reference.
what we are doing. This is the recommendation that we got when we were discussing, the high-level discussion about network organization.
So my answer to the question would be, it's going to depend on how you've set your network up, how big each, let's say, segment of your network is, how you've structured the network. There's no answer for that question. It's going to vary depending on your unique situation and how you've chosen to architect your system. I would say if the most you have is 255 hosts in every system, and that's a mix of stupid HMIs and not necessarily PC-based HMIs with some I/O and some PLCs. I'd probably have a production VLAN, a switch management VLAN, and maybe another VLAN for suppliers or something like that. Would I split that up and say I have an HMI, a PLC, and end up with 7 VLANs? No. I don't think you'd buy anything. If you set your network up much differently and you do a lot of routing and you do a bunch of other layer 3 activity on your network and how you structure it, then there might be some benefit to that, which would be a whole other set of problems I wouldn't do myself. But I have friends in U.S. Car that do. There's no set answer for your question. I guess you really have to understand how your networks are set up and how you choose to set them up and understand what makes the most sense in terms of VLAN organization.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time, and first thing I have to remind you again, please take the poll. With that said, would you join me in thanking the panel for a very interesting discussion?